Just last month, the reagents at the Signala facility have been dealing with a whole new prime asset, set out to make their new year a rough one. And if they thought that this new one would be any less scary than the previous 4, they would be in for a surprise. So let's break down the story of Sister Liliya Bogomolova. In 1939, a young girl, nicknamed in a news article about the incident as the Feral Girl, was found by authorities. She was found within a homemade prison cell, nearby a dead woman that is presumed by authorities to be her mother. But unfortunately, since this feral girl only communicates using animal-like grunts, they are not able to actually verify this with her. The Sisters of St. Gaspar's Orphanage would take on the responsibility of caring for the 11-year-old girl, while authorities attempt to find out the whereabouts of any of her surviving family and find any other people that might be responsible for her shameful state. Unfortunately, she would not adapt well to her new home, with the sisters describing how the young girl would regularly disrupt the going-ons at the orphanage. Authorities believe this behavior could point towards a history of abuse, as if finding her in a homemade prison cell wasn't enough proof of that. Lilia was the only child of exiled landowners who had to flee their motherland in the revolution, spending the first 10 years of her life within a box, a homemade prison, never once seeing sunlight, never seeing her mother's face or even hearing her mother's voice. She would be breastfed blindfolded, in complete silence. The first human face that she ever saw, or the first human voice that she ever heard, was the police that found her within her cell that day at 11 years old. She would spend her teenage years at the Parisian Catholic orphanage, within earshot of the bells of Notre Dame in Paris, struggling to fit in well at the orphanage, being shunned by the other girls there. She was emaciated and strange, acting like she had never eaten solid food before, instead opting to attempt to breastfeed by one of the nuns. This obviously didn't go down well, but I know damn well that Franco would be a very big fan of Lilia with the addition of that little detail. It turns out that she was absolutely obsessed with the Bible, saying that she learned how to speak because God himself was the one talking to her. Once able to speak, the other girls at the orphanage began to warm up to her, with most of them believing her to be actually overwhelmingly charismatic. With Lilia now believing that God is speaking to her, he would tell her that she is the Russian Joan of Arc, and her sacred mission is to walk to St. Petersburg and liberate it from the Hun. It wasn't long before she left the orphanage on foot for St. Petersburg, Russia. Now this is where things get really quite interesting. It's not long after this that World War II was happening. Stories began in Russia about somebody called the Angel of Leningrad, or the Russian Joan of Arc. She would become a legend amongst Russian forces, calling her Bogomolova, the same name God told her to call herself years before. For context, Bogomolova means beloved of God in Russian. She would survive for 3 years in the most brutal warfare possible, becoming a Bogomol, the Russian term for a praying mantis, an ambush predator, disappearing into the shadows, hiding among statues, among corpses of the frozen dead. She believed that she was protected by God and killed countless German soldiers during the siege of Leningrad. The Germans were terrified of her, while also being oddly fascinated. Eventually Germany had to retreat from Stalingrad, and God's protection on Lilia was now over. A Nazi officer, retreating from Stalingrad, went on to capture Lilia, chopping off her right hand as punishment for cutting his face while he tried to restrain her. She would curse the officer, and in return he would cut out her tongue. There was no telling what happened to Lilia while the Germans took her on the rat line to the Mediterranean. But once in Genoa, with no tongue, she began to pray, and the night before being put on a boat to Argentina, a miracle happened. Her tongue grew back, and she could now speak once more. But not only that, after listening to God's voice, she could now speak in God's own tongue, using this new language to give the German officers in charge of her some ideas. After influencing them to fight each other and kill each other, she would head into the forests of Eastern Europe, lost for years. But villagers and travellers would find corpses in these forests, transformed into religious statuaries. Years later, oddities continued happening. Rich folk, wealthy families, and industrialists that were funded with American dollars to rebuild Europe post-war were all of a sudden spending all of their money with no real reason or cause, and suddenly, just like that, they would vanish from society. Later, these bodies would turn up, usually in pieces with different body parts missing. These odd behaviors of the rich, as well as their similar deaths, would garner the interest of the CIA. They would go on to appoint an agent named George Nichols to investigate the deaths, and more importantly, the link that this may have with some missing funds from the Mutual Security Act, which have been missing, and the CIA have been unable to find where these funds could have gone. The Mutual Security Act, for anyone curious, was a real US foreign aid law that was brought in by President Truman in 1951, with the aim of giving economic assistance to free nations and allies to build infrastructure and defenses, overall helping strengthen themselves against the Soviets and containing communism as a whole. Tens of millions of dollars are missing, and Agent Nichols suspected a person named Liliya Bogomolova could be responsible. Dawes would tell Nichols that his theory warrants further investigation, and provides him the resources to do so. He would go on investigating into the ruined estates of these wealthy families, and garner more details of this Angel of Leningrad, or Sister Lilia, from people, putting together a comprehensive background that I just mentioned. He would connect the dots between the feral girl from years earlier described in the news article, and this Liliya Bogomolova of Legends. They were one and the same. One of these wealthy people that went missing was a millionaire, Jackie Trugoat, a person of interest that Agent Nichols wanted to focus on. We can actually see an article about his death in the newspaper, showing that the shipping magnate's death was due to asphyxiation rather than blood loss from all the missing limbs and such. It was ruled that Jackie must have done this to himself, but Nichols wanted to dig a little deeper. He would speak to the Trugoat family valet, before mentioning how he was half of a man, completely mutilated, even among survivors of landmines. He was missing his left foot, he only had 2 fingers remaining on his left hand, he had 1 eye, pretty rough stuff. He spoke about Lilia as if he was reciting gospel. He clearly considered her like a saint. He mentioned how Lilia had become Jackie Trugoat's spiritual guide, helping him sacrifice the evils of money and cut away the evils of the flesh. It was here that it clicked for Agent Nichols. Trugoat wasn't embezzling the MSA funds that were missing. He was literally destroying his money, in between the removal of his own fingers, eyes and limbs. Imagine it like a Build-A-Bear, but in reverse. Nichols would ask the valet why Jackie would do such a thing, with the valet telling him that it was simply because Lilia asked him to do it. The valet's own injuries were also because Lilia told him to do it. Nichols described the valet as being almost in love, or possibly inspired by Lilia, someone who had seen God with his own 2 eyes, or I guess 1 eye now. In one of Agent Nichols' journal entries, he mentions feeling dizzy and having a fever, wondering if he had caught something, struggling to keep his thoughts straight. The valet told him that Lilia is now with one of the Trugoat children in a lodge within the mountains. Nichols would head out to the location and actually find Liliya Bogomolova in the process, described as a religious parasite, exploiting the spiritual vacuum in the hearts of the wealthy elite, turning their hunger for conquest against their own bodies. Lilia would talk to Agent Nichols, telling him that she would allow him to bring her in, as long as he gives her gifts. What are these gifts, you may ask? Well, it's to cut away at his own sins, under her direction, the same direction of God. In 1953, Agent Nichols, now missing an arm, leg and an eye, would take Lilia to Mount Massive Asylum, where he would meet and speak with Dr. Vernick. At first, Vernick believes Nichols of being a survivor of landmines or artillery due to his injuries, since he did actually serve for the Americans in the World War. Nichols would describe this story to Vernick, fascinating him since he had heard his own stories about the Angel of Leningrad during his time when he was serving the Nazis and hearing it from the German officers. Agent Nichols believed that Sister Lilia witnessed something in the siege of Leningrad, in the wilderness consecrated by the blood of entire nations. Dr. Vernick believes him to almost be obsessed with Lilia. Lilia being brought to Mount Massive doesn't seem like a random piece of luck. Vernick believes that Lilia wants to be brought to Mount Massive just as much as the CIA want her to be here. He thinks it could be due to the wealth and corruption of America as too much of a temptation for her to resist. Years later in 1960, Silas Knisley returns to Mount Massive Asylum, where he's currently working in the Human Resources and Corrections Department. He requests the medical reports for a patient within the asylum for a patient transferred to the Signala facility. Liliya Bogomolova marked in her files as critical security and would require the direct permission of a Dr. Vernick if she was to be transferred. Silas would waste no time and arrange a meeting with Rudolf Vernick. Within her medical files, it stated that Lilia has now been catatonic for about roughly 5 years, and eating up a considerable amount of the budget for security and sedative reasons. He had negotiated with Dr. Easterman the transfer of Sister Liliya Bogomolova to the Signala facility, something that he considers a great deal. It's like selling a dead dog for the price of a prized horse. Vernick explains the story of Lilia to Silas, and shows him just how dangerous she really is. Wherever Lilia goes, she creates acolytes, all mutilated, missing tongues, arms, eyes, and legs. Half of these new patients at Mount Massive, by the way, these acolytes of Sister Lilia, were once staff members, doctors, administrators of Mount Massive. In just the first 6 months of her stay at Mount Massive Asylum, they lost 20% of their budget to her influence, a complete pure waste of funds. They would then go on to lose 10% of their staff to her manipulation, or she would simply kill the ones that she couldn't manipulate with blades she somehow kept hiding inside of her gowns. Vernick considers her far too dangerous and, more importantly, expensive to keep, but far too interesting to kill. With the only choice to keep her sedated to the gills for their own survival, Vernick laughs at the chance to be rid of her to Signala, deathly curious of the scientific results of what she could do there, but reminds Silas that they aren't sending them a dead frog, but instead, they're sending them a viper. And that is the story of the new prime asset, Sister Liliya Bogomolova. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it to the end of the video, write Mantis in the comments down below so I know. Personally, this is my favourite backstory to any character so far. Or at least it seems like one of the more fleshed out, no pun intended. If you enjoy Outlast content or just lore content in general, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content in the future, especially since I have a lot more time this year to make videos, which I just cannot wait to do. Until next time guys, peace.